Welcome to the Everyman Tales. I'm so glad that you joined me today. I am Everyman, and I'm going to be your storyteller. And these stories are intended for bedtime, road trips, adventures, family time, and every time in between. They're intended for any age and every mind. Get ready to engage your imagination. Get ready for the Everyman Tales. There is a fine line between flying and falling. Titus discovered this very quickly as he had outleapt his vision and was now descending into a crevice inside the mine of a geode of whatever it was that he did not understand. He was descending so fast that the air around him became wind flying past him. The light green tint that surrounded the inside of the geode and the crystals of the ceiling and walls began to dim, and then they began to dim very quickly. Titus was falling and falling. The joy, the peace of leaping 15, 20 feet in stride after consuming the liquid crystal that had fallen from the sky had left him. Titus didn't know what to do. So he prayed in his heart, "God, please help me." He opened his eyes. The green tint was gone. He was falling as fast as a human could fall, and he had nothing to see. Then he heard out of each ear a giant whoosh, and talons clamped on his right arm and his left. There was no light to see, but something had Titus. The initial whoosh disappeared, and there was no more sound of anything, but Titus's fall began to slow. Then it stopped. Titus was temporarily suspended in midair, and he looked up and saw a light far, far away. The top of the crevice, it looked like a ribbon of light going across the sky, and then, like a rocket, he started to fly towards it. He had no idea what was a hold of his arms, but he held them out straight away from him and began to ascend towards that ribbon of light as quickly as he was descending away from it just a moment ago. He turned to his left and to his right, but whatever it was about the canyon engulfed everything he could see in blackness. He could not see, he could only feel his arms, and they were definitely gripped by talons. Not sharp and piercing, but so tight that he felt like his fingers would go numb any second. The ribbon got thicker and wider. He saw the green tint. He was flying so fast the tears were falling out of his eyes. The hair was plastered against the back of his head. He was flying at rocket ship speed. And then, just before he reached the widest top of the strip of light, just before he reached the cliffside, the talons seemed to fling him towards it. He was flying, not descending, not falling, but aimed directly at the edge of the cliff. Titus took a deep breath, kept his arms out, bent his knees as he flew towards the edge of the cliff, and just before he hit the edge, he topped out and was able to step, not fall, not come tumbling down, but whatever it was that had thrown him back up towards the edge of the cliff had given him just the right propulsion to basically step out of the crevice onto the cliffside as if he were stepping off of a porch onto a lawn. Titus was amazed. He immediately dropped to his knees and looked to his left and right and saw green grass, a lavender river far behind him, the ceiling and edges of the geode-like cavern in which he was inside of, and began to notice trees, bushes, many colorful things that he wasn't able to describe. He didn't know what they were, but nothing that looked like it had talons or wings or could fly. Titus was at a loss as to who or what had saved his life, but he was very thankful that they did. He began to walk towards the far end of the cavern. His energy was still there, but he decided not to run full steam towards what he didn't know what was ahead of him. Titus rubbed each arm. He had been gripped pretty hard, and there were definitely marks there. He looked. There were no scratches, But the marks that were left by the talons of whatever had grabbed him seemed to be more than just pressure marks or bruises. He rubbed his arms. It almost looked like his arms had been branded in some way, like the talons had left a permanent mark there. Wrapping around both arms, just past his shoulder. He didn't know what that was. It didn't feel like a bruise, it didn't hurt, but it was definitely something that looked like it might be permanent. He wondered how he would explain it to his mother, but he decided to put that aside for the moment and plod ahead towards whatever it was he would come across next. Far behind him, Titus could hear another one of the semi-liquid crystals falling from the ceiling. The whistling sound like something plummeting to the earth, because it was, and then the non-impact of when it reached land. He was still amazed at what was happening around him, but he realized he was becoming accustomed to some of the things. The green tint was a normal hue for him. It didn't create any sense of confusion or anxiety. He decided to pick up his pace a little bit, but not sprint at full speed this time. He didn't get winded. It was as if he could have gone on forever. And after what felt like several hours, Titus thought it might be a good idea to sit down and assess his situation again. So he found a nice clear spot, sat down, and began to pay more attention to what was under his feet this whole time. The grass would part, and then he looked below it. There wasn't really a surface of dirt like you would expect, but it was more like a skin, more like a kind of hide, or not fur, but that's what he began to realize the grass may be. It was fur-like, almost alive in its consistency, and he could not pull it out, he could not tear it, and when he tried his best to grab handfuls of it and yank it out, it was as if the ground came up with it. He decided it was most similar to fur, and he wasn't going to try to pull any of it out anymore. He laid his head down and drifted off to sleep. With no concept of time and no idea what time of day it was, Titus woke up in what felt like a sufficient amount of time, very well rested, and was a little hungry again. He sat still for a moment, didn't hear any whistling from the ceiling, anything plummeting to the surface, so he started walking again to what he presumed was the edge of his cavern. Every once in a while, he would still see, out of the edge of his peripheral vision, both on his right and his left, movement. A bush would move. The grass would part for something. He couldn't make out what it was yet, but he knew whatever it was, it had saved his life, and for that he was thankful. He did know that there were two of whatever they were. They wouldn't move in exactly the same pattern. A bush would move on his left, one would move on his right. He wasn't quite sure, but he did know whatever it was watching out for him. Up ahead, Titus saw in the edge of the cavern a blackness. Now, the entire cavern wall had been made up of the crystalline-looking subjects like the inside of a geode. That's all Titus could describe it as. But up ahead to his right, in a section of the interior wall, there was what appeared to be a cave. Titus thought to himself, that could be my exit. That could be an escape and a way back home. So he picked up his pace, he headed toward the blackness, and wasn't sure what he would find. It began to get larger and larger, and yet the crystals around it remained the same size, as if he wasn't getting any closer to them. He got closer to the blackness, it got larger. It was like a cave entrance, but it wasn't attached somehow to the cavern walls. He didn't know what it was, but he was walking towards it. Perhaps this was a way out. Perhaps it was not a way out. The great blackness was some kind of animal. Titus froze. The blackness began to move. Titus dropped to his knees. He knew that one of the things that attracted wild animals was movement, so he decided to pretend to be a stone. He pretended he was a statue, a Titus statue, and he did not move. He tried to keep his breathing to a minimum, but he kept his eyes distinctly on the blackness. The blackness began to turn. It was still totally black, but there were things he could see, reflections of the green tint, almost like the blackness was a fur of some kind. It began to move to the left. He didn't see legs. He did not see paws or claws or arms. He couldn't even make out the head, but the blackness was moving left. Titus was totally still, not making a noise, trying to breathe as softly as he could. His own heartbeat was beating so loud in his ears, he feared the blackness would hear it. The blackness moved slowly to the left, almost gliding across the surface of the fur land. And then without any provocation, without anything happening to create the sense of fear or foreboding or anything, the blackness dropped to the ground. It still was able to be seen, but it was almost as if a hole in the ground had been created. It was totally black. Titus could still see the blackness, but it was because it was flat against the ground, and there was like a separation where the ground and the blackness had met, and the blackness had overcome it. Whatever it was, it could change its shape radically, dramatically, and in a millisecond. Titus remained frozen as the blackness slid across the fir grass, still moving left, but now not taking up any of the space in his field of vision, only visible where the grass would part for the blackness to move across it. Titus slowly had to turn his head to the left so that the blackness would remain directly in front of him. He turned as it moved to the left. He turned more. It moved further left. He turned more. He was so focused on the blackness moving across the fur that he did not hear the whoosh until it happened. Before Titus knew it, he was in the air. Both arms grabbed at exactly the same place. He looked to his left, to his right. There was no cavern this time, but Titus still could not see what it was that had a hold of him. It was as if they would go behind his back every time he turned to look. So he just looked down. The blackness had become thin and was reaching toward Titus as quickly as it could. It was stretching, reaching, becoming thin, and Titus realized the closer it got to him, the faster he was moving through the air. Then Titus, in a second, stopped moving up and started moving forward. He could tell because he was moving parallel to the ground. He looked up, and it seemed like the ceiling was still miles above him, and the wall of the canyon of the geode of whatever it was still just as far as it was the last time he had looked. But he was flying at a speed he'd never traveled in his life, again moving so fast that tears were coming out of his eyes from the wind. And as he looked down, the blackness was slipping farther and farther behind him. Titus didn't know what had his arms, but he was thankful that whatever they were keeping him safe from the blackness that was trying its best to touch Titus. Titus did feel slight fear, but he knew that whatever had him was keeping him safe, and they were indeed watching out for him. Titus looked down and behind him. The blackness was far out of sight, and before he knew it, he had been let go. He was descending towards the fir grass, flying down. Nothing had his arms. He was going to crash, and right before he hit the land, he did exactly like the cylinders from the sky that had fallen. He slowed down, he touched the grass, and laid down. Titus instantly felt exhausted and fell into a deep, overwhelming sleep. As he drifted off, he was sure he heard the sound one more time. Whoosh. Thank you for tuning in to the Everyman Tales. Who knows what's going to happen to Titus next? From beings that help him to fly to a blackness that's trying to consume him, grass that feels like fur, a lavender river that fully satisfies his appetite, and cylinders that fall from the sky. Titus is having the adventure of a lifetime. Tune in next time to find out what his next adventure is. And you can listen to the Everyman Tales, by the way, on the Podbean app. You can also find me on Amazon Music, Audible. Just say, Alexa, play the Everyman Tales. I'm on TuneIn, iHeartRadio, Player FM, Listen Notes, Podchaser, Boomplay, and more. And if you've got a Facebook account, I do have the Everyman Tales podcast that you can like and follow. Be sure to share the Everyman Tales on all your social media pages so that when your friends or family are in the mood for a good story, they can just tune in and relax. The Everyman Tales is appropriate for a variety of situations: road trips, story time, bedtime, daytime, downtime, exciting time, when you've got a few minutes you want to fill with something that's going to engage your imagination. Well, you found the right place. It's the Everyman Tales podcast. Thank you for engaging your imagination. Thank you for tuning in to the Everyman Tales.